So the phenomenon I'm going to be talking about today is Korean pop or K-pop and its growth from South Korea to the world. Um, so in the past couple of years, it's grown exponentially, and it feels like almost everywhere you look, it's just there. Twitter, Instagram, any sort of social media website, it's there. It just seems like you're never gonna stop seeing it, and you probably put it with a bunch of crazy fangirls, etc., etc. But that wasn't necessarily the case with K-pop when it first started. Had its slow rise like any other genre that's gotten to its size today, and it starts in the small country of South Korea. And we're going to be looking at the history of it, influences, the impact it has on South Korea's economy, the use of social media and how it's been effective so far, and some recent history of it so far. So, looking at why K-pop got so big. In the history of K-pop, there have been just a lot of people who know either BTS or Gangnam Style. If you're not really too familiar with it, those are the two things that you're probably familiar with. But this story starts in 1992 with Saotaji and Boys. They performed their song I Know. It was an electronic hip hop song, which was completely different with how normally things were back then with music. They used to perform ballads or trot songs, which is basically folk songs. And it essentially caused a teenage culture to explode within South Korea, and they love this type of music. Over time, three entertainment companies really started to show out within the early 2000s and late 90s. SM, JYP, and YG. These essentially were the three most dominant companies that were here in South Korea. At the time, K-pop wasn't necessarily big in the West, but in the East, China, Japan, and Southeast Asia, they were fairly successful and also training the artists to speak in those languages as well. Just to give an example of how influential K-pop was back then, a music video called G by Girls' Generation garnered over 80 million views on YouTube in 2009. And that in itself is a feat in its own. Now to the influences of K-pop. Now when it comes to K-pop, there are some people, like I mentioned earlier, that can really sort of give that stepping stone into where it is today. And Gangnam Style by Psy, and sure everybody knows the iconic song that first hit 1 billion views on YouTube. Gangnam Style was probably the song that helped break Korean culture into the West, truly with people that weren't really just interested in Korean music at all, but allowed for that to be a segue into other groups like Big Bang, Girls' Generation, Wonder Girls, and it allowed for just Western media to perceive different cultures in general better. And also the use of social media. Many people can probably reference the fact that Gangnam Style received probably hundreds, almost thousands of parodies across the world, which helped its spread and diaspora of this culture. You can see a link to the video here if you somehow forgot about it. Now, the impact on the economy has actually been substantial. A group that probably everybody knows and doesn't really understand the impact on just how big they are. In 1998, Korea had a financial crisis. This was sort of when K-pop was starting to take its first hold on the music charts, and where big groups started to see financial gain. It didn't really start seeing huge effects up until around 2016, where a group called BTS was probably still is the most successful group, bringing in over $4.9 billion a year and another $1.45 billion a year in added value each year, and with a 10-year value of around over $50 billion on the Korean economy. This is due to their obviously worldwide success, bringing in tourists, clothing, cosmetics, and even food. And this is only in Korea, but also they've increased the amount of fans in the past 3 years by over 22%, which also again attributes to the amount of money that goes into the K-pop industry. So yeah, you can see just how big they are by sort of how they're dominating the Western market with the interviews that they're having, etc., and the collaborations as well. The use of social media is actually very important for K-pop groups because it allows for them to engage with a fan base and develop sort of a personality with groups, and sort of sets a precedent with how they sort of see themselves and portray themselves in a different light that isn't, behind a camera or at a TV show or on stage. This sort of adds a personal element towards it, which a lot of fans can agree that makes it feel a lot better than just seeing an idol always being on stage or practicing, etc., etc. And also, social media is a great way to sort of look at just the size and impact of K-pop and the fan base. You can see with the amount of views that videos are getting when they come out. Well, for instance, as well, there was a song called Fancy by Twice. In the summer of 2019, it was probably the biggest girl group song. It was made in a bunch of memes. People were dancing to it twice as fast. And yeah, social media is important for social influence, and it also helps groups stay sort of relevant in the Western world. And as of late, 2018 was probably one of the biggest years in K-pop, just because of the amount of fans that came through from many of the senior groups, and also many debuts amongst companies that are popping up around the world, not just in Korea itself. There have been a lot of big moves sort of into the Western market, which is unheard of for a lot of K-pop acts and groups. An invitation to award shows and even more, as well as viewing K-pop as a legit sort of money source. KCON is something that's held around the world in cities like New York and Los Angeles that fans can pay up to $1,400 for a ticket, just to show just how much money people can get from this. And also to view sort of how this is spreading. Foreign idols, which are basically people who aren't Korean or don't have full Korean in them, are starting to pop up a lot more, with training academies popping up in Australia, in India, Thailand, China, America, obviously. But it continues to grow. So it also, looking at sort of some of the songs that you can view here that may fancy your palette if you just want to try some songs throughout the years that sort of fit these little standards. And yeah, that is all. I hope you enjoyed the presentation.